What's going on, everybody, and welcome into the channel. Brenden Schaeffer here with another fantasy football mock draft. My most recent video and the last few actually have been PPR mock drafts. Today, I want to do something a little bit different. Have a little bit of time here before my afternoon radio show that I do in Columbia, Missouri. And I decided we're going to go with a half PPR draft because I realize that a lot of people don't play full PPR the way that I do. I'm in about a dozen leagues, and I think all of them are full PPR, with maybe a couple of variations for tight end premium and things like that. But I understand that most people tend to play half PPR. That's kind of the happy medium for a lot in the fantasy community. So I decided I should probably do some videos with that in mind. And so we're going to run one here real quick on Sleeper from the 1.10 draft position. So kind of close to the turn, but not all the way at the turn. A lot of times you get advice on, you'll Google for, hey, I'm at the turn, or hey, I'm at the top of the draft or the middle of the draft. But I wanted with this fantasy football channel to give you specifics from every draft position 1 through 12. That's the goal before the fantasy season begins. I think the NFL season kicks off on September 7th. The first Sunday is September 10th. So right here on this channel, Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football, we want to make sure to go through all the possibilities for 12-team leagues, PPR, half PPR, all of it. So let me know in the comments below what your league setting is, what your fantasy questions are. I'll answer them in the comments, but I'll also potentially do an entire video from your draft position. If you've got something in mind, you say, hey, I really want to know what's it like in a 14-team league to draft from the turn. I'm happy to run that with you and can actually invite you to do it right here with me on Sleeper. But for right now, I've got a little bit of time, so we're going to run this draft. I've modified the draft timer to 30 seconds fewer than usual. I typically go 2 minutes on my previous videos. We'll go 90 seconds here and try to power through, get this video done in about 20 minutes. And we see right off the top some surprising changes from what I'm normally seeing in PPR drafts. Nick Chubb going a little bit earlier than I'm used to. He was a target of mine if he would have fell to me at 1.10. It didn't happen. But keep that in mind. I don't know that this will be completely typical when you go to your drafts, but Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler are going to be the two running backs that go first off most draft boards. But beyond that, Bijan Robinson going behind Nick Chubb in this draft is a little bit interesting to me. I don't know exactly how much Bijan will be used as a pass catcher for Atlanta because, frankly, I don't think they're going to throw the ball all that much. But Nick Chubb could mix in more as a receiver this year with Kareem Hunt out of Cleveland. But let's go ahead and look at the board. We've got a ton of great options at wide receiver, and even on the way back, we could potentially double up. Even in a half PPR setting, I'm not afraid to go wide receiver heavy at the beginning of a draft. If you've seen my videos before, you're definitely familiar with that. And if you haven't, click subscribe on that button there on this YouTube video. Click like on the video as well. And check out some of my other stuff for PPR leagues that I've done so far on the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football channel. Here we're running out of time. Bijan Robinson at 1.10 feels like an excellent value, especially in a league that doesn't ding you as much for not being a pass catcher. So that is my lean here. I'm surprised to see him fall that far. I've drafted a lot of Bijan in the first round. I was looking to maybe do something a little differently here, but I think value-based drafting, you have to make sure that if somebody like Bijan falls to you this late, you take your shot at him. We're hoping to see a guy like CeeDee Lamb or Amon-Ra St. Brown fall back to us in the second. It didn't happen this time, but we're not all that concerned about it. We're probably going to stick to wide receiver here, although Jonathan Taylor, if things happen to shake his direction in Indy and the injuries and the weirdness with Jim Irsay goes away, he could be a value at this spot in the draft. But we want to make sure that we are decently covered at wide receiver. Davante Adams has fallen to us at the 2.3. I'm not inclined to take him, though. When I draft wide receivers, I'm looking for the up-and-comer, the next guy to emerge, rather than maybe paying for past performance, which if Davante Adams is here near the turn, I think that's kind of what you're doing. I'm concerned about Jimmy Garoppolo being able to sustain Davante Adams the way the fantasy community is used to seeing. So we're going to look a little further down the list. Garrett Wilson is one of the considerations here. Chris Olave, we really do want a wide receiver one, I think, at this point. And if you look at the other three that are being considered here, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith, all wide receiver twos on their actual NFL teams. So to me, Garrett Wilson is the one that makes the most sense. We're going to go ahead and click the button on him. Patrick Mahomes goes 2.5. Derrick Henry later in the round. Ramondre Stevenson. Team 4 not too concerned about the Zeke Elliott signing. Neither am I, quite frankly. The draft board unfolding, and we get a big run on wide receivers in the early portion of the round, and then round 3 ends up being heavy on running backs. Pollard, Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, Najee Harris, and ETN. It's an interesting eclectic mix as far as the running back position is concerned. We still see Jahmyr Gibbs falling to us at the late third. And I'll be honest, in a PPR league, I'm all over that. I have to take a moment to consider whether half PPR is enough of a bonus for a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who's not going to be on the field 70, 80% of the time necessarily, but he's going to get enough, I think, work in the passing game to be very fantasy relevant in leagues that reward pass catching. We like T. Higgins. He'd be an interesting guy. Up here at Garrett Wilson, when we picked him, we weren't necessarily looking for wide receiver twos on their NFL teams. But the wide receiver two on the Bengals could be a very attractive pick here late in the third round. Let's kind of play this ADP game out a little bit. T. Higgins is certainly going to be gone before our fourth round pick at the 4.3 spot. Could it be that Jahmyr Gibbs is still there? I think that's certainly a possibility. Deebo Samuel, you get into that next tier of wide receivers. We're really hoping one of those guys fall, but I do think that I like T. Higgins and the upside with Cincinnati enough to go ahead and click the button on him and try to play the game a little bit, and maybe Joe Burrow falls. We wouldn't mind making that stack happen. So Jahmyr did not fall, but Joe Burrow did. Jahmyr goes right behind us at 3.11. I think it was always a long shot to see that he would potentially go. But we like what we've got here in terms of youth and upside. Bijan Robinson, Garrett Wilson, and T. Higgins. What about that stack with Joe Burrow? A lot of people think, oh, you want to stack Burrow and Jamar Chase. I mean, that would be wonderful. But T. Higgins is no slouch in his own right. What were his touchdown numbers like last year, I wonder? These are good things to kind of check up on. It looks like just 7 receiving touchdowns last year. I think the Bengals offense, as long as Burrow's healthy, could be even more prolific this year, especially in the passing department. Joe Mixon, not all that reliable, and he could be suspended a few games. He's going to get the workload. I think they're going to throw the ball a ton in Cincinnati. But do we want to go on quarterback this early? At the quarterback position, you're looking at Burrow, Fields, Herbert, Lawrence, and then I think a huge drop-off. No interest in Deshaun Watson. Dak Prescott, he'll be fine. But, I mean, I think it's a substantial dive. Could we get a run on quarterbacks that burns us? Yeah, we could. There may not be any of these QBs left in the late fifth. And I would say in a half PPR rather than a full PPR, it makes sense to go QB a little bit earlier because you're not passing up on all those pass-catching points. Screw it. Let's go with the Burrow stack. It's not something that I often do. You don't want to force stacks necessarily. I will be curious to see where Herbert and Lawrence go off the board. If one of them falls to us at 5'10", we might be a little bit of a regret position on going QB so early, but we were a little worried that might burn us. It ends up that Trevor Lawrence does fall. I would rather have Herbert than Lawrence, but Lawrence is certainly the last of the tier. But because we set up a nice stack, that's going to make Bengals games really enjoyable to watch. It's a high-flying offense. T. Higgins, I'm a little worried about his injury concerns, just because it seems like he was banged up often, and it wasn't always enough to, like, you knew going into a Sunday that he was going to be out. That got really frustrating with Zach Taylor, the mind games that were sort of played. They'd say, oh, he's going to be active, and then he would play like a snap and leave the field. Kind of a frustrating guy last year, but don't hold that against him for future seasons. That's not necessarily indicative of the guy that he's going to be this year, and that can be important to remember. So we've checked off the quarterback position early. We don't have to worry about that moving forward. Tight end, I would say Kyle Pitts is maybe the last guy that's interesting because he's got that tight end one upside, but we just don't expect the Atlanta Falcons to throw enough to make that worthwhile, and we did already draft one player from that offense. I think he's the guy you want, Bijan Robinson. Everybody else, you're playing with fire a little bit. So we're going to look at the wide receivers and running backs here. I look at this Cam Akers to kind of Dalvin Cook tier and think the value on these guys is not necessarily as good as the guys coming next in that Javonte Williams to David Montgomery, James Cook tier. So we're going to wait on running back and select a wide receiver here. And we're going to go with the upside in youth again, and we're going to take Christian Watson. And we'll see who falls back to us. Pitts goes, but that's fine. We weren't taking him. Quarterback goes. So we honestly end up making a nice selection because anybody at the wide receiver spot that we were hoping would fall, like a Lockett or a Mike Williams, we're cool with having those guys. They end up not going to team 11 or 12. As we mentioned, we weren't looking Akers. Godwin, I just don't really want to mess with the Tampa Bay passing offense, not knowing who the quarterback's going to be. So we don't have any problem with what happened there. Running back, we're going to have to click this ADP game and see where the line is. It doesn't seem like we're expected to get any of these running backs come back to us other than maybe James Cook here. Here's our next pick after this one. Got some good upside receivers right above the line. Pickens, Addison, and Smith and Jigba. Man, running back. What I've told myself, especially with this being half PPR, I think you want to go a little heavier than running back than I usually do. My draft strategy, for those who have seen my videos, I go wide receiver heavy, and then I plan to trade my excess and surplus wide receivers for the running backs that happen to not get hurt over the first few weeks of the season, because we see so many RB injuries early, and I'll let other people draft those guys, and then I can kind of have my pick of the litter by trading into some healthy wide receivers, healthy running backs when the time comes. I'm worried about getting burned here at running back. I really am. But I think the upside at wide receiver is very attractive. We're going to go with Mike Williams at wide receiver. He's going to be our second flex if you look at this spot on our roster. Right here, Watson and Williams in our flex spots. Let's see how many running backs go off the board. This could be a bit of a concern. It could turn retroactively into more of a hero RB build, which I'm very much not opposed to doing this season in the fantasy realm. We went that Bijan pick number 1, and we haven't selected another running back since. We were hoping to see some quality running backs fall to us. James Cook is one that did. If you tell me that I can have the guy that I project to be the RB1 for the Buffalo Bills, which could be another explosive offense in the NFL, I'm taking him in the 7th round pretty much every time. Feel a little safer about guys like David Montgomery in terms of floor. But other than that, I would take James Cook over Pacheco, Rashad White. Akers is a tough one. He could be a workhorse in that offense as well. I don't get the love for Alexander Madison. Going to be honest with you, I'll have 0 shares of him with where he's going. If he's down in this round 7, round 8 tier with some of these other guys like Montgomery, Pacheco, different story. But it's not where he's going. He's going around 5, round 6. So we're not going to have any Madison on our teams this year. Javante's a guy that I really like. I wanted to see where the sleeper ADP would put him naturally, though. I've been drafting him a lot in my videos, and he lands middle of the 6th. I think he's going to keep going up, especially if he has a good showing in the next preseason game. People are going to latch on to that. Again, I don't understand Breece Hall in the 3rd, Javonte in the 6th. That should be more like a 4-5 split to me than a 3-6 split in terms of round and value. I'm going to have a lot of Javonte Williams, but here we go, Mike Williams. I want some Chargers on my fantasy teams. We're going to get James Cook here real quick. I'll talk a little more about Mike Williams after we see the board unfold. Jordan Addison, we miss out on him. He's a guy that we really like. But we just aren't finding ourselves taking a lot of Addison because he's going in this middle round 6, round 7 tier that we often are taking running backs because we're loading up on guys like Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, maybe even Christian Watson. This draft is kind of fun. I'm not taking a lot of guys that I always take. I'm mixing it up a little bit, which is good. It's good to kind of see a draft like that unfold and go, am I cool with how this played out, or do I need to really stick to my guns in a real draft when I know that I'm going to have to manage this team all season and say, yeah, Christian Watson, I might really like him, but do I really like him enough to click that button on him? If not, all right, then maybe I take Tyler Lockett instead because I know that's a guy that I really like. It's a guy that I've always been in on. Get your guys. That's got to be the bottom line in drafts. But I want to mention real quick with Mike Williams, I've had a hard time because I'm very high on the Chargers offense this year. Kellen Moore, the new OC, is going to do wonders for Justin Herbert. And so will just having a healthy pass-catching core. If Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and now Quentin Johnston in the fold there, along with the running back Austin Eckler, are all healthy, that offense is going to be a juggernaut. The problem is I haven't found the value on guys that I really like in the Chargers offense. Mike Williams, though, in the 6th, when he's your second flex, that's value that we can live with. We got to make this next pick and then talk about it. We did already just draft a Charger, so we won't go Quentin Johnston. I've been getting a lot of Zach Charbonnet, and because we're a little bit weak at running back with just the 2 and Bijan and James Cook, we'll draft the backup in Seattle, who I like more in PPR, but I was a little under the gun because I have a habit of talking my way through a lot of these picks. So we went with Charbonnet because we know he's a guy that we like. Between our 2 picks here in round 8 and 9, we did lose some quality options. Gabe Davis I like, but we do already have a Buffalo share. Quentin Johnston goes, but we're fine with that because we took Mike Williams in this particular draft. Cortland Sutton, I think, is interesting, but he's starting to come up a little bit. I was seeing him in middle round 10 in mocks earlier this month, and now we're seeing him fall up, or I should say rise up to 9.6. Zay Flowers is a guy we would have loved to have seen drop to 9-10, but let's see what other wide receivers we've got here. Yeah, that is a bit of a bummer. Zay Flowers is the last of a tier for me, so something to keep in mind if you're drafting in this spot, you're looking for that first bench wide receiver, you might end up a little bit lighter at that position. I look a little lower for a guy like Sky Moore. Maybe that's somebody we could take at some point. I'm finding myself taking a lot of Devon Achane. Let's check out the running back rankings right here. I know it's half PPR, but I still want guys that could be involved in the pass catching game. Brian Robinson won't be. Samaje Perine, if we're higher on Javonte, we're lower on Perine. That's natural. Khalil Herbert is intriguing as far as Chicago goes. I'm starting to talk myself into Roshan Johnson being a thorn in the side, though, for a guy like Khalil Herbert. I don't really want any Deontay Foreman. He's a little lower on the list. But again, not a pass catcher by trade. But Devon Achane in a potentially explosive offense, you're seeing my videos, you're seeing me draft a lot of Charbonnet and Achane back-to-back. Because if I can stash those two guys on my bench with the hope that they can turn into something interesting, it's kind of a low-risk, high-reward proposition, isn't it? Because we figured that James Cook and Bijan Robinson are going to be our starters. We've got enough depth at wide receiver to not need a running back in the flex until we get into the bye weeks. I've got no problem with it. I almost feel like I'm doing this too often because I don't want these Achane Charbonnet guys to move up draft boards in the 9th and 10th rounds, or 8th and 9th rounds is where we got him. That's great value. I feel like Khalil Herbert is great value in the 10th as well, but I do want to grab a wide receiver for my bench. And we were fortunate that Sky Moore didn't go here. Guys are already taking backup quarterbacks. Team 12 decides Anthony Richardson's going to be their QB1. I like punting at quarterback. I didn't do it in this draft, but I respect the move, respect the hustle. We are a little bit concerned about having Joe Burrow, but I think if you're drafting this on September 1st, we're going to know more about how healthy he'll be going into the year. Shouldn't be a concern at all. Oh, boy, what do we want to do? 20 seconds left on the clock. We'll look at the tight end. We'll glance at the tight end market. I still think it's a little bit early. This Higbee, Laporta, Dulcich, maybe even Kincaid is interesting. We'll be a little bummed if he goes off the board. We're going to scroll a little bit for Sky Moore and select him at wide receiver. He's going to be our 5th wide receiver, and he could be the wide receiver 1 for the Kansas City Chiefs. So having that on our bench is something we're really into. Jameson Williams, I'm curious to see how far he falls. He's now got a hamstring injury. We know he's out for the first 6 weeks anyway, so the injury shouldn't change anything. But if that drops him into like the 11th round, something else you should consider when it comes to Jameson Williams. If you're in on him like I am, like I really like the talent coming out, he could end up being a bust. I mean, that's definitely possible. Things have not gone his way since he came into the NFL. But the first year I don't hold against him, Jameson Williams, because he injured his ACL in the national championship game. The last college football game of the season, he got hurt, devastating knee injury, had surgery. Nobody expected him or should have expected him to be great year 1 in Detroit. The fact that he was on the field at all, I was cool with. The gambling suspension kind of hurts things, but he could be a value. You just have to think, do I want to have him sitting on my bench for 6 weeks? If you have an IR spot and for whatever reason your league allows suspended players on IR, Jameson Williams is an auto draft for me in the 10th round. But most leagues will not allow that. Mine do not. You've got to be actually injured to be on IR. So I probably won't end up with a ton of him in redraft, but I'm holding those dynasty shares for the most part. I think I did trade one recently, but it was a deal for Tyreek Hill that I just couldn't pass up. I'll try to think of who else I got in that deal as well. All right, let's check the draft board here. Looking at running backs, we always go as young as we can at RB. Okonkwo and Kincaid off the board at tight end. It's getting to be about that time. I'm going to kick myself if Sam Laporta, my favorite late-round tight end target, were to go here, and Dulcich got picked, so it was possible that he would have. If this is a real draft and not a computer thinking without good AI tech, Team 12 might go Laporta, Goff, and have that be a way to start their season if they're not so sure about Richardson out of the gate. That would be a tantalizing combo, I think, for the late-round stack. So I'm glad I went Laporta after seeing Dulcich go to Team 12. Let's take a look at our roster and see what we might need. We like where we're at quarterback. Bijan and James Cook at RB. Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Christian Watson, Mike Williams. The upside and largely the youth on this team, really exciting. If we're thinking about concerns, Higgins and even Watson and Mike Williams for sure. Injury concern, perhaps. Having an injury history for some of those wide receivers. But I think we've got a lot of upside in that group. I want another wide receiver, though. I'd rather have a 6 wide receiver than have to have a 5th running back. Because I feel like, when the running backs get hurt, I can grab the backup for whatever team needs one off waivers and add that guy. But at running back, we're thinking Tank Bigsby, Roschon Johnson. A couple of targets for us here. Deuce Vaughn could be fun to add at the end of your bench just to see. As far as receivers go, I don't really know who I'm targeting this late. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and grab Tank Bigsby because we're cool with having him. I did say I want to grab a 6 wide receiver. And because we are at a good spot with our selections at quarterback and tight end, we've checked those boxes. We feel like we could probably draft a wide receiver with our last pick here. I could see Laporta being a guy that we have frustration with if he doesn't emerge right away as a rookie tight end. And then maybe we have to get creative with trying to hang on to him on our bench for a couple of weeks before we see what he's all about. But at this point in the draft, it's the very last pick. You're looking for upside and potentially guys that you could know after a couple of weeks. All right, let's just drop him if it's not happening for him this season. So for that reason, I don't really want to go running back because I think those rookie running backs can take a little longer to unfold. What about a wide receiver? Jonathan Mingo, could he be involved early for Carolina? I think it's kind of wide open there with a rookie quarterback. Who could be the pass catchers? Adam Thielen's an option. Hayden Hurst is an option. So we're thinking about him. We're thinking about Justin Ross, too. Tank Dell is another one. Puka Nacua, I think, is Nacua. He's a little lower on the list, but he's somebody we could throw a dart at for the last round of our draft. We are already invested in the Chiefs, and we're not dropping Sky Moore, even if he has a slow start. So that makes us a little less likely to go Justin Ross. Let's take Jonathan Mingo, because there's a world in which Adam Thielen looks a little bit old and doesn't have the chops to be the top pass catcher in that offense. And Mingo was a guy with good draft capital. Can he meld with the rookie quarterback Bryce Young to do some good things? We like the upside there for the end of our bench, so we'll go ahead and select Mingo. All right, this is a theme for a lot of my teams. Who's the oldest player? It might be Joe Burrow, like 26 years old. Mike Williams. We draft young, but we do it for upside. Love the bench of Charbonnet, A-Chain, Sky Moore, Bigsby, and Mingo. I think that's a bench that I could have in a real league. That could actually be something that I pursue. Let me know what you think the weaknesses of this team is, though. Remember, it's a half PPR draft from the 10. I don't really love drafting from the 10 necessarily, but I like to challenge myself in these mock drafts. Draft from spots that you don't feel comfortable with, especially if your league hasn't already decided where you're going to draft from. Try to practice from the spots that make you squeamish. It can make you a better drafter, better fantasy player. If you like this video, click subscribe to the YouTube channel, Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football, and throw it in the comments sections. Anything you want to know, any player comparison, any dynasty questions, or potentially the type of mock draft you would like to see next on the channel, make sure to hit subscribe and be along for the ride all fantasy season on the Brenden Schaeffer Fantasy Football channel. I appreciate you guys, as always, for joining me, and we'll talk to you next time. Peace.